This is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is January 7th, and I'm interviewing Joan Brown. Joan, you have depicted a lot of women characters, children, a lot of domestic scenes, and you're also an advocate for Indian children. And I wonder if you can tell me where you were born and grew up.
Well, I was born at Yahola. Unless you're at a certain age, you wouldn't even know about Yahola, so that kind of dates me. But it was also a Creek community,
Right.
and so I grew up in that little area, and then moved into the big city of Haskell, Oklahoma, which is about 1,000 people, but that was my beginning. But when we moved into Haskell, next door was the art teacher for the high school. She and her daughter lived there, and so we became great friends. And she would have little art classes in the summer, and children, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, in that age. But I just loved it. I had a great time with her, and so she stimulated that creativity. Now, my folks said that I would, because when we lived out in the country, I would just draw and take a nail, and scratch it in the wood, and pictures of trying to do that. But my dad, he was an architect too, so I kind of came into that by way of him, and he worked up at McDonnell Douglas in the drafting department as well. So anyway, there was some influence there, but you just don't realize, I think, sometimes that young children, the things that stick with them or impact them. And I can remember this profile that my dad drew of a man, and I couldn't have been any more than 4 or 5 years old, but I was so impressed with that. I thought, wow, that's great. So it's just some of those little things I look back now and think, well, what stimulates that creativity and that desire and everything to get things down on paper or canvas. And so anyway, that's a little bit a long story. But
Were there any other artists in your extended family?
We had an aunt that lived through the field too, and she taught in a one-room schoolhouse, grades 1 through 6th grade. And she was somewhat creative. And so when I would go over and visit with her, they didn't have any children stay there. Well, she had all these materials I could use, and like crayons
Besides
and things
nails
like
and
that.
pencils.
Because we're talking about a time that was, after the Depression. Of course, I wasn't born in that, but still, times were hard for farmers and things like that. So there wasn't a lot of money to throw around. So
Right, for
anyway,
art supplies.
right.
So basically, you're a young Cherokee girl, and you're living in Creek Country. Did your
Well,
folks?
uh,
Go ahead.
Cherokee and Creek, a little
Okay.
bit of Creek. So
Okay.
yeah, but I really grew up in the Creek area and had more influence, I think, through that than I did with the Cherokee at that time. So, uh, but at that point in time, I think that most people wanted to be the same culturally. I mean, I know that there was still, because of Concharty Mountain that was out close to us, there was a lot of Creek people lived out there, and they still had their grounds and things like that, and they had their camp meetings. And my dad would go up there, but he went up and he put together a ball team out of little boys that were 8, 9, 10 in that area. And so we would go and pick them up and come into Haskell and play in different areas. And people just didn't have money. I mean, he had to get out and get money for shoes and uniforms and all kinds of things. But it was a unique all Native American team at that time. You just didn't see that as a rule, playing in with other, the regular system through the.
They were playing baseball with
Right,
an Indian
right.
baseball team. So did you when you say that people wanted to be the same culturally, are you talking about the fact that you weren't really encouraged to identify Indian that much, or?
It seemed that to me. I mean, we knew Indian people, you know, but there wasn't a big emphasis about that. And of course, that was the Korean War and all that, and people getting jobs and everything. So I know that Dad and several of the men from Haskell, you know, drove back and forth together. But you know, it was a small community to begin with.
Right.
And I think that makes a difference.
The focus was on kind of blending and assimilating. How many brothers and sisters did you have?
One sister and one brother. My brother has a degree in architecture from OU. And of course he was in the service, Air Force, and traveled all over the world. And so, and he enjoyed art, but he just didn't get tied into, you know, or didn't really go in that direction of being an artist per se. But anyway.
I read that you, in some ways, you had kind of a rough childhood, and you lived with your grandmother for a period.
Yes, yes.
How did that impact your life?
Well, it was that time of and the influence on people, what they would see, especially through the media of movies and things like that. But you know, it was sort of a time of things that picked up because of the war. People had jobs and all that, but it seemed to me that the drinking and everything and all those things increased. And my mother, she had some emotional problems and things like that. But yes, and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who lived in Choska, you know, so that was another Creek community. And but those I was really close to her. Really was close to her, and she loved having us there, you know. So, but yes, I lost my dad, suicide, which wasn't or isn't. I guess it's a sad way to put it, but it's just not that, or wasn't that unusual, you know.
Right.
Drinking and just the discourse of stress and everything in the marriage. So, but anyway, yeah, it has an impact no matter what. Perhaps made me stronger because I had a brother and sister to worry about, you know, too. So
you were the oldest.
Right. So
kind of in charge. So did your grandma speak Creek? Did she speak the language?
No, that was my mother's mother, and my dad's mother died when I was pretty young, you know. My dad, and at that time too, another emphasis was we learned some Creek and Cherokee words and things like that, general conversation, but not to any great extent because nobody wanted to be
right
any different, you know. So
so your Indian ancestry is on your dad's side.
Mm-hmm.
Did you you mentioned a little bit of your experiences with art in school as you went along through the school system? Did you get any reinforcement or for your talent?
Not particularly. I can remember my aunt and uncle, the school teacher, but my uncle, it was my dad's brother, and wonderful people and very supportive, but he wasn't really thrilled about the art part of it. He said, you can't make a living on that unless you're Charlie Russell.
Many artists have heard that.
Yeah. And so there wasn't really but what are you really going to do with your life, you know? So there wasn't a lot of support for that. That was just kind of a hobby, or what they viewed as being hobby things, you know. But but in later years, my aunt, of course my uncle passed away, but my aunt really, she was a school teacher as well. The one-room school that she taught in, but she expressed that she was really pleased, you know, thought that that had been a real asset to my children and myself, and my children, they love to, all my kids are creative in some avenue. Now, they're not as committed to the hard work about that. They'd rather, they have degrees and are teachers and things like that, and that's not easy, but they just saw the hard work that goes behind it and the hours that you commit to, and so they decided that wasn't what they wanted.
But they appreciate
right.
how much is involved. What was your first experience with Indian art?
That's all I ever did. I don't know.
Were you drawing Indian subject matter then when you were little?
A lot of it was. I'm trying to think what, and that was what I was around. At least the people in the just the people. Well, that's just what I drew. But to get in more in depth in culture and everything, that came, later on again, because it wasn't really encouraged at that point. But like the baseball games, stickball, things like that, I'd seen, and knew of earlier, and gosh, ball games. And it's still that way, and I think that's a great thing for Indian kids.
Yes.
So, yeah.
You went to Bacone at one point.
I did. I went to Bacone in the early 70s. I'd worked at different jobs. I'd lived in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and everything, but my husband, he was Native American, an alcoholic, and I don't mean that that's just the average. I mean, that's just the way it worked. And I had 3 children. And my children, I had taught them some beadwork, and they made little things, hair ties and rings and bracelets and things. And we would supplement our income by going to craft shows on the weekend. Like Fort Gibson, when they opened that up over there. And that was, thinking, at the time I didn't realize it or think about it. Of course, you never do until later, but Will Sampson was there. The Tigers were there. I mean, it was just people that you just took for granted, and you'd say, hi, same shows and all that kind of thing. But that's actually, I guess, when I've really gotten more involved in that, in those kinds of shows. But it supplemented our income some, and so my children grew up more in that culture than I did to begin with, so. We did that, but back to Bacone. But at one of these shows, Terry Saul came by, and I didn't know who he was except he was an Indian man, and then we visited a little bit, and he said, well, why aren't you in school? And I thought, what? And he said, well, I teach art out at Bacone College. He said, I wish you'd come out and see me, and you need to be in school, and
wow.
So I said, all right, but I was working at that time, and I'd saved my money because I knew I didn't have any money. I had no idea there was any avenues for money. But I'd saved enough. I'd called out there to take a class, art class, and went out there, and anyway, we lined up outside to enroll, But Terry Saul came down the walk, and I spoke to him as he went by, and I thought he won't remember me, but he stopped and came back, and he said, what are you doing out here? And I said, well, trying to get to school. I know people have heard that story, but he did. He said, well, come on with me. And I thought, great, I'll get in here and get out, one class. All right. But we wound up upstairs, and the president of the college, which is Charlie Hollyman, Creek man, and anyway, Terry Saul said, well, this is Joan Brown. She has talent. She has no money. And I thought, what a strange introduction. I thought, oh, my goodness. And Charlie Hollywood looked at me, and he said, you say she has talent? And he said, yes. And so he wrote out this paper and gave it to me. It was a full scholarship to go to school.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful story.
And I was just in shock, really.
Right.
But I left knowing that I was going to do that.
Right. And somebody believed in you that strongly.
So, yeah.
Were you, just quickly, when Terry Saul first saw your work at some of these arts and crafts shows, were you already doing women and children as subject matter, or were you doing
Well,
different
and
things?
some of the things too was the Trail of Tears show. You know, you would enter some things over there.
Okay, so
with
you had entered that
depiction.
show.
Yes, and so I already had some things underway, and he he was pretty good. He saw that I had the ideas and the creativity,
Right.
and then when I tried to go to a particular style that I thought I was supposed to stick with, then he'd say, "You have a style started. Don't go away from that." He
I
said
see.
that's hard to develop. You know, if you can copy and do the same thing over and over. You know, but develop your own style. And so he encouraged that direction, which I didn't think what I was doing. I saw it more as I don't know. I just didn't see it as to be Indian art to begin with. But he was very encouraging, and honestly, I would never have gotten into it if it hadn't been for him. I just don't think I would have ever. And I tell young people that ask me about that, and I said, don't miss that experience of going in and sharing with other artists and an instructor that you can go to and ask and get that information. And I see a lot that want to just jump out there and they have it and they say, well, here.
Right.
And they'll point to Jerome because that's kind of what most of them have come to thinking. He just jumped up one day and became an artist, you know. And he had an interest, but he did go, and that just developed, you know, which is great. And that camaraderie of other artists is
Right.
wonderful. So,
And those influences that get traded around and that
Exactly.
creative synergy.
exactly.
Just to pick up a bit, I want to make sure I understand. So when you were showing at Trail of Tears and some of these other places, you were sort of using this style, more
Well,
kind of.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's
but,
okay,
yeah.
but it wasn't a flat two-dimensional style. That's what I'm trying to get at, I guess.
I had kind of mixed that. I was doing both at the same, you know, and hadn't fully moved into the other, but I was there at the first show. Think about that.
Wow.
And this was hung on chicken wire outdoors, like they built up quick little things to hang artwork on, and you talk about primitive.
Was this in the late '60s or was this?
This was in the '70s.
Early
I mean, when they started, and I'm pretty sure that was their first show. Let's see who. Well, I know Tires was there, and I think Joe Rector, some of the others, but there was some artists there that, and it wasn't that big a show. It
Right.
was just.
Right.
I'm looking back and I think about, gosh, how that grew out of that.
Well, who were some of the your fellow students at Bacone at that time?
You know, most of the students, I was a little bit older. I was in my 26 years old, I guess, 25, 26, but so I didn't live on campus, so I didn't have a lot, but Buddy and Glenda Scott were going to school then over there, and they were a little bit older than I, and they were Creek, but they did a lot of arts and crafts things, and I met them at shows, so I had some folks like that I already had some contact with, but when you're working and going to school and taking care of a family, you just don't have a lot of time to hang out with. Benjamin Harjo, not the artist, but this is another Ben Harjo that was there at the time, and he was character. He had a lot of creativity, but he came to the first class, and then at the end of the semester, I saw him at the last class.
Nothing in between.
Yeah. So it was kind of interesting, but he's on the Creek Council now, but I was but you know, you just meet a lot of people that have that character, and well, they're creative folks. That's just the way it is. You know?
So were you living in school still then? Were you living in
No,
Muskogee?
I lived in Muskogee at that time.
When did you, you had already entered some shows, but when did you begin to enter, in Trail of Tears, I guess, but start some other competitive shows? Was it immediately?
Well, that was the first one that I'd entered at all. And we'd travel to do, the museum, when I went up there, Chief had kept pushing me to go up there and enter a show, and I didn't feel like I was ready for that. And Jerome had really picked up, at that time. And gosh, after he saw his work.
Was this at Council Oaks, or was this at Cherokee Museum?
At the Cherokee Museum. I'm sorry, Five Tribes Museum.
Five Tribes, okay.
Right. And so, but I took some work up there, and the lady said, "Oh yes, Terry Saul's been telling me about you." So, well, okay, I'll enter. And Woody Crumble was the judge the first time I entered, and I had won third place in painting in Cherokee Division, and gosh, I thought, oh wow, that is wonderful, and I was still impressed by that. And Woody Crumble, years later, when I saw him, I said, you judged a show I was in one time at the Five Tribes, and he said, well, I remember it because that's the only one I judged for them. So it was, but he was very supportive too. There was an art show downtown in Muskogee, but for some reason he was there. But he said, you need to start getting plates on these things, get so that you can make prints.
It can really make a huge difference, I know, to have a well-known artist judge your work and give you an award. Did you end up having quite a bit of interaction with Crumble, or was it just...
Well, over the years, and he always remembered me, which I was very honored for. He would come up and visit with me, and I felt really great about that, and that was encouraging. And I think, that's, as we're older artists, I think that's important for us to encourage the young artists. What I see today is there's not that big group of people going into Indian art. I think back at our time and think about all the folks that started painting and still painting. That was a pretty large group. It was a swell at that time of
Right.
A major group of people. But
why do you think that is?
Well, again, I go back to, is it the hard work? I don't know. I'm just not sure about that. Or it could be more students are getting into commercial art.
Mm-hmm.
That may be more enticing as far as money and things like that. I just don't know. But
Because there's still a strong market for Indian art.
There is.
What about some of the early galleries that you dealt with?
Well, there again, I really was slow on the uptake of getting out and promoting myself. I just didn't do much of that, but I worked with, of course, I was introduced to Linda Grieber, Ben Harjo, the artist,
Right.
in Tulsa, and so was included in her show the next time she had one, so that was good. And so that was my first experience or introduction to a gallery there. But locally in Muskogee, this lady, Charlene, had a little frame shop, and I would get some things framed for shows, and she had approached me about she wanted to have a show, locally, and really I hadn't sold that much locally or anything, but she kept kind of pushing about that, and Marie Skaggs, that was local as well. And she came to me about doing a project for the mentally handicapped in Muskogee and doing some artwork that they could sell to build a group home for folks. And I had, at that time, gone to work for Murrow Indian Children's Home and worked there a couple of years. So my heart was really into, providing good care for people. And I saw the care in the program that was there at Murrow, And so I talked to her. I said, well, I'm going out to Santa Fe, and for the art market out there. And I said, let me think about it. When I get back, I'll get back with you. And so when I came back, I said, well, what if we do 5 sets and release 1 set each year? That'd be 5 years of time and everything. And so she was really elated about that. And so that was instrumental in helping get the first house started, and now there's 3 in Muskogee, which is pretty good for this population, I think.
That's amazing, really.
It really is. But wonderful people, and it was just another great experience for me. But just to be able to be a part of that building. And but Murrow became a big part of my life as well. So things would change there, I left one time for 2 years and then went back, but eventually, I say eventually, but I had 35 years in when I retired from Murrow last April. So.
And how did your art skills come to bear in your job? Did you do any teaching of art classes, or?
I did. I wouldn't say that they were just structured classes, but we had we do projects in the summer. We started out that way. Mary Horsechief was the director there then when I went to work, another artist, and we had met through Al-Anon, actually. So anyway, but so the summer programs, and that was kind of a low time and money again, but I approached her about putting together a summer program and do some trips and things and go out and do sketching and things. And she said, well, if you can come up with the money, fine. So, but I did go to the county commissioners that were here at the time, and they allotted us $1,200 for the summer, which was great.
That's wonderful.
That was just fantastic. And so that was our first official summer program planned program. But the kids really enjoyed it, and we had some good times. And so that just has grown, or did grow, over the years. And again, you'd have some students that like to do that, but most of the time I found that kids enjoyed it. You didn't have to get stuck in one media, or be such a structure, you have to do these steps first. We just went with what kids like to do, give them materials and them experiment, and just the experience of being out there and eating lunch, and just doing things like that. And so, and I had really some pretty good artists too that came through and went back to their home, their tribes, and so that was.
That's great.
Yeah.
Any names we'd be familiar with, or?
Well, the one in particular, I found out that he had passed away not too long ago, but so but really, Kevin, he just had so much talent, but so many of our kids that we had at Murrow, all kinds of problems within the family,
right.
And so it's quite a struggle, but Murrow had been a mission for children from Reverend Murrow started that in the 1800s.
Right.
And it was just a wonderful education for me, and for the opportunity to be that close and be able to be a part of the giving and everything that. But it still amazes me. Last summer, this man came in. He was retired out of the Air Force, but he was there in the early 50s. And his 2 brothers, they were just young, and he didn't have any pictures, of his brothers. And one of them had died when they were there, and I don't know what circumstances, when I went in and went back to find the file, and you have stacks of files and paper files, but anyway, there was a picture of all 3 of them together. So, that some of those things you just think, gosh, I'm so glad I could do that, and go back and but that was just an experience. And over the years, I tell you, we sat down one day and said, well, approximately 1,500 kids at least I had contact during that time, and experienced part of their lives with them.
That's an amazing legacy. Did you pursue your own artwork while you were there, and what kind of a routine while you were working that were you able to?
You know, it's always interesting. I know Mary, of course everybody has a different take on things, but Mary had said, well, you can work on your artwork here too, you know. But that was when I really saw a need for social worker. There wasn't social worker, there wasn't counseling services in there, and so I got involved in that end of it, and counseling services through the state, local facility. And so when you get into that, it kind of begins to roll and take priority, you know, and
Sure.
so, but I still kept up a lot of the being able to get in the shows and things like that, and still had good friends that were involved as well and had lives. We did a show called Daughters of the Earth.
I wanted to ask you about that group actually, and the show, etc. Can you explain how that came about?
Well, I think Virginia Stroud and I can't remember who else had kind of started that idea. Doris Littrell was a part of that out of Oklahoma City, and so they put that together and collected these women that would be interested in doing that, and the overall conversations, you know, of being with that group of people, women, was that we all had these families that we were taking care of, and all these things that were going on that, and still yet we managed to work the art in.
Right.
So I always wonder about testing men that way. You know?
Exactly. How much multitasking can you do?
Right.
So in addition to trying to raise your collective visibility as a group of Indian women artists, was it also kind of a support group, or?
Well, of course we all knew each other, and that was good. We were all compatible. We could get along pretty well, you know. So, and when you're traveling, that's a good thing.
Yes.
You know, so.
Yes.
But it was fun too, and we didn't know how that was going to be received. Number one, because males in the art world had a little more received more attention. Let's put it that way. I think at that time. But we were so well received in the different areas, Nebraska, Virginia, you know, just different areas. It was amazing, and the people that came out to see the work, and that was really a boost to all of us. So
the reception that you had.
Mm-hmm.
And are we talking the mid-70s here, or?
Now, I'm going to tell you something. When you're interviewing people over 50, you should warn us ahead of time.
Well, if it comes to you, and we can definitely, I can
think
look that up.
that was in the 80s.
Okay.
Early 80s, I think. So I may be wrong, but I believe that was. So.
Other members of the, did Jane Malden and Val Jean show with that
Jane
group
Malden
also?
and Val Jean Hessing were sisters. And of course, anytime they were together, that was always the fun part of it, I tell you. But they were, both of those ladies, so creative, but their minds were just like that all the time. It was just going and playing off of each other, and we would just be sick from laughing, you know. But so, just really great friends, and just a joy to be around. They made it very light and fun.
And I imagine you guys were sort of again a sort of source of support, etc. When you needed each other.
Mm-hmm.
I read in one article about Daughters of the Earth specifically that while you and Virginia and some others were doing your art at home, you had to be really ingenious, even about the way that you set up your studio space. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Oh my goodness. Now you have to remember, we didn't have a lot of money. And I was thinking the other day, what was I doing with these 2 old air conditioners anyway? And you say, well, how does that work? Well, they were, I had 3 children, and then I had 2, there was 10-year space, and I had these 2 younger ones that were just months apart. You know, it was like 11 months between those 2. But anyway, in order to, I had a big round antique table and did a lot of painting on that wood table. But I'd be painting, and those little kids would run up and hit the table, you know, things like that. So I came up with this idea that I'd get these guys to stack these 2 air conditioners, and I would get on top and sit on that because they were so heavy, it didn't matter if they hit those.
Right.
I know that's a picture, but that's what I did, you know. I'd have all my sketching down. It didn't matter to sit down at the table with that, but when it came to the painting, when you put that paint down, it's down. So I know there's artists that have similar or maybe even worse stories than that, but oh my goodness, yes. And then the other alternative was to wait until everybody was in bed asleep after midnight and then paint, you know. So did a lot of that. I remember one time going out to Santa Fe, and I needed money to get out there, and I talked to Doris, and I was working on a pretty good sized piece, and she said, well, bring it by, I'd be interested in it. And I wasn't quite finished. I had the frame and everything with me. You know, I know you've been through this.
Yes.
And so I worked until 2 o'clock and decided, well, I'm wore out. I'm going to sleep 2 hours until 4 and get up and finish it. So that's what I did. And you know, and then she took it out to, the other show, and is it in Arizona that happens right before or after the Santa Fe? But
yes.
Anyway, I won an award out there, which was great. But yeah, I look back and think, well, I must have been out of my mind. Or why aren't I out of my mind at this point? But
Sometimes those are the best pieces. When you mentioned, at some point you did return and get a degree in counseling at Northeastern, as I understand it.
I did go to Northeastern. I didn't finish and get a degree, but I was right at that point. It would have been good, but I had a lot of health problems, lost a kidney and things like that. So I had a couple of years there that were just, I couldn't do all the,
Sure.
you know, run to school and work too and things like that.
Was that while you were at Murrow, or
Yes.
in that break?
Yes.
Okay, you were still employed at Murrow
Right,
and Trent.
right.
Yeah. How do you think the Indian art scene changed during the 80s? I mean, maybe the presence of women then, or stronger presence of women artists, was part of that.
Well, I think women brought on, and this is going back to the Nebraska show, there wasn't as much sadness as you saw in men's work. And I'm not saying that they may have been locked into that because that's what people expected too, but you saw a lot of family things. Val Jean, you know, in her work
Yes.
too, she had a lot of just families, children, daily tasks, and humor, and that's what a lot of the people that came in just enjoyed, that take from the women,
Right.
that away from that grief so much, you know.
Right.
But
And there's, of course, you know, some theories about how, people in colonized situations, people who have been colonized, the women often are resilient, a little more resilient, in part because they don't have to totally redefine their tasks. You know, they can still
stay with
do their traditional things, and men sort of lose
right.
a lot of the roles that they played. You became a master artist of the 5 civilized tribes. What did that award mean to you?
Well, number one, I couldn't believe that. Back to Terry Saul, he was one of, or some of the first group. I don't know if he was one of the first group, but I know that within those two, the first and the second. But I wanted to go up and see him receive his award, and
Yes.
because of him being my instructor. But again, as I say, he was always so supportive. But after the ceremonies, and we were standing out on the porch there, and he came out too, and they'd been given these big round silver plaques, with his, and Joan Hill was given one that same time too, as I remember. But anyway, I said, well, congratulations. And he said, well, it's good to see you and everything. And I said, well, gosh, I had to come see this. This is great, And he said, oh, you'll be getting one of these one day. And I just laughed, I said, sure, yeah, right. But, again, he's so encouraging and just always very positive and supportive. So, but that's, again, when that happened, I was, no.
And he was right. He was
Right.
prophetic. In 1990, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act was passed, requiring that Indian artists have proof of enrollment or that they be certified by their tribe. Do you remember how that impacted galleries and individuals?
Well, I know there was a lot of discussion among the artists and everything, because it changed some lives in some ways, because just things came out. Because I remember one particular artist had assumed he was a particular tribe, and then it came out he was actually been adopted and was another tribe. So there was just lots of things with that when it came on that created, and some sadness too, because you had people that you admired, and still do. I mean, and they've grown up in the culture, they've been there in the culture. So there's sadness there, and there's, it's just, it's a big question mark. There's so many things. And I know during my time at Murrow, through the American Baptist churches, and their headquarters is in Valley Forge, that there's been over 300 tribes, and this is more recently, approached them about giving them support to be recognized by the United States government.
Right.
So you weigh that, and you look at that, and you think, and that's a fact, because the East Coast was hit so hard, it almost wiped out.
Right.
And if you were small, it was harder to recognize small than larger.
Yes.
So, so it's just there's a lot of ifs and whats and a lot of things going on with that. So I don't know. I just don't know. But and then I see some tribes that are relatively small, and they've run out of people. They can't, if they marry a tribal member, it's a cousin, or so you're getting into, now they have to be, some of the tribes are saying quarter or more, and they're really fighting for that. But when you look at it realistically, they can't keep that up and survive.
Right. The Cheyenne Arapahoes are going through
right.
something like that right now. I know that Murrow went through some tough times financially in the 90s, and I think maybe you were already retired from there, but
No.
You weren't. Okay.
No, I just retired this year.
Oh, this year. Yes, you mentioned that. I'm sorry. I just wonder, was there a period, so it was not easy to do your artwork. Was there a period when you kind of stopped painting for a while, or stopped doing art?
Murrow is a ministry and mission of American Baptist churches. It's not affiliated with any particular tribe. So in that way, that was always kind of rough. But what brought on survival for Murrow, I think, because it had been closed once for 2 years. because of finances and different things. But when the tribes began to gain more money through casinos, things like that, they were very supportive of Murrow, and that brought that on at that time. And the Creeks, of course, were one of the first to step up and commit to a yearly donation to us, and then the Cherokees and some of the other tribes could put in more monies to help with some of the kids from their tribes. And we had kids from all over the state of Oklahoma, so that was a big, has made a big difference for Murrow. Now, you have to look at still that 65% of the income comes through the churches, and right now is not a good time for across the country. So many people out of work and one thing and another, but at least they do have the tribes that recognize it, especially again the Creeks, because of that history with them. Then they're very good to step in and help in emergencies. So.
Well, now you're working at the art market.
Yes,
and,
yes.
Besides, just it's nice to have a paycheck and be around art. I'm wondering if there are some specific creative benefits for an artist for working in a gallery.
Of course there is. I get, gosh, it's great, and I know Linda was having a hard time, with some help and things like that, or finding help, too, and the gentleman that works here 4 days was trying to work the 7, so that was a stress. But we were talking about it, and I said, I think I could help a couple of days or so, and she said, oh, I was visiting with her and her son Chris, that we'd gone out to eat, and I said, and I think I'd like that, it'd be good, because, you get a certain point, you don't want to just sit at home all the time, and you'd think, oh, well, you can sit and paint all the time. Well, that's not that's not it either. But anyway, so that's how that began, and I love it. I've been here about 3 months now, but it puts you back in the mainstream and gets you more excited again. And so I've been working on some things, and you get older, you better hurry up. Those eyes might go, So, but yes, it's really been fun, and get to see the artist again and things like that. So,
Gouache and pencil, as I understand it, are your preferred media. Have you worked much in any other media?
Well, when I started back home, of course, we worked in some acrylics and oils and things like that. And I would like someday to do some landscapes and things, because I just love that, and the sunsets and things like that. So I'm experimenting a little bit along that line.
With some acrylics.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, acrylics dry so fast. Of course, I should be used to that as a watercolors.
Yes.
But, yes. But I've never been a big fan of acrylics, but that's just me. I kind of like that opaque, and you can really get that acrylic can dry fast.
Well, I was going to ask you, what do you like about gouache and watercolor?
Well, it has, Val Jean, if anybody's familiar with her work, she could get that really flat with the gouache as well. And gouache has some versatility. I can get a opaque with that as well, and it can be softer, and that's just part of what I like, is that softer approach to it. I love the flat style, and of course Valjean had that sewed up as far as I was concerned, in her corner of it. So yeah.
Well, and I love you just have this wonderful use of line. You have excellent draftsmanship, and it's kind of like
black and white. I love black and white, or dark brown and cream, that kind of thing. But pen and ink.
Yes.
I tell you, I took piano for, I guess, about 10 years, and loved it.
As a child or later?
Well, in my childhood. I
Okay.
started at 6 and was taking piano for quite a while, but into my teens. But music, and I think that I like to try to get that into the work, and I like those lines, that flow and everything, and pen and ink is a good place for that, I think.
So you're thinking about rhythms, sort of
Mhm.
consciously, the
Mhm.
rhythms of the
Right.
lines.
Movement, it's much like music, yeah, to me, that's what I think, so.
I've mainly seen smaller scale works of yours, but do you work larger sometimes, or is it medium to small? Is that kind of your format?
Well, I like to do the larger pieces, and I have done several through my life. I just don't have any. That's
the dominant characters in your work, I think, are either children or traditional, Creek or Cherokee women. You call them Sofky women or Canucci women, and you show them cooking sometimes or doing daily tasks. But I wonder if you could just talk about what those women represent to you.
Well, for me, and the time for myself, they were the strength of the family. And I say that with, they still allowed the men to have some of their thoughts about their. I did several paintings with fishing with men and women, and some of the humor, that would go along in the simplest things that you would, well, one was where she started to throw the pole out and the hook hooked him, in the back. I mean, just different things that kind of express that relationship that
Yes.
is subtle, but because usually there's not a lot of emotion shown in public between a man and a woman, or Indian. But it's there if you just watch, the looks, the different things, the little experiences, the titles that I put on there usually lead into what's going on as well. And so I like to do the pieces on men and older men. And I like to get back into doing some of that. But the women took over, in my life and the work, because of the attention that I got from older women that really plugged into that and could relate to it. And so that's what they wanted to see when they came, to the art shows.
Besides being drawn kind of in this cartoon tradition that, they're kind of plump, your women,
Mm-hmm.
and they have these strong features, or kind
Mm-hmm.
of salt of the earth,
Mm-hmm.
kind of salt of the earth attractiveness. Did you experiment with a number of different types of faces or facial features when you kind of came up with your women characters?
Usually, I could start with the eyes, and I know that sounds kind of crazy. I mean, I know how to lay out with the circles and the egg shapes and all those kinds of things, but I wanted to see what would appear in that face and then build from there. And the eyes are usually the place to start with that. And I can have an idea, but if it works and those eyes kind of show that curious or that humorous or that, just that character in it, then it goes from there easy. That's
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
so.
that makes a huge sense to me. I've heard you compared to like a Norman Rockwell. I don't know if you've heard that comparison.
Yes.
But
And I think that was because of the stories that I was trying to tell through the
Yes.
work. I think that was, I'm flattered. But
it is, I've always thought it wasn't a very apt comparison either.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
he's so focused on the details and the
Right.
realism, and
Right.
yours is very.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you'd seen Bill Flores's work, the Indian cartoonist who's Potawatomi.
I have seen his work. I like that. It's been a while, but he has that humor. And
Right.
yeah.
I read that when you were experimenting with some other styles, particularly the flat style work, that you weren't able to get the humor and drama that you wanted with that style. Starting with the humor, how would you describe the humor in your paintings?
Well, that's kind of a tricky, because you never know how that's going to be received, you know. And at first I had, I remember one of the comments was, well, the titles, that's kind of like Jerome did, put titles on it, you know. So I thought, well, I don't want to be accused of copying. So I dropped that, and then I had people write and say, no, we like the titles, you know.
How did you use the titles? Was it a way of zeroing in on the joke, sort of? Or
yes, of what was happening in the title usually. Really, after they saw the title, then they paid more attention to what was going on, you know, and really got it then, you know. So, but not all of them were like that. I don't always put titles on everyone, but that just became something people would say, well, they expected to see that title, you know, so.
Right.
So,
well, and it's subtle humor, too. I think a lot of it comes from relationships, different, clashes of different personalities,
right.
One example we'll look at the little boy who's the next in line for the haircut, and he's not happy about it. So you also had this reference to drama, and your pictures aren't overtly dramatic because it's not men playing stickball or galloping horses or anything. What is dramatic to you? What do you look for?
Well, I had one print, it's been a while back, but it was a mother holding a sick child at night when they're running fever, and it was an Indian child, an Indian mother, but you could just, if you've experienced that, you know how that is, that you don't want to go to sleep. You want to hold them and stand up and walk the whole time if necessary. But so some of those things like that I had in paintings, there was people that really connected with that, you know, and when a child falls and gets hurt, you know, you hurt with them, and it's just the different experiences, or the fun things when they just start discovering. I remember one I did with this little boy crawling around, but he discovered a frog, and the frog discovered him, you know.
Right.
And there was people doing average things, fixing meals, and women, you know, but here you had this, and his eyes were big, and the frog was kind of, you know. So, and I just enjoy that moment of that, capturing those little things like that.
So the drama in domestic or outdoor sort of everyday life and in relationships.
Another one that I like particularly, but Indian men, men in general, I'll just put it that way, wore a lot of khaki a long time ago, and but I had a man, they were going fishing, and he had on these boots, and of course they were stuffed in the top, you know, and wrinkled, and it's an older couple, and the hat, and that was all kind of crumpled too, but and she had reached back to take the bucket to carry it because he had the poles and stuff, but it was just that kind of, the look they gave each other, it was partnership there, you know.
Yes.
So just things like that people usually connect with, even if that title wasn't there.
Right.
You know? So that's.
Can you talk a little bit about color in your work? Because again, I think it's a very subtle use of color.
Well, that it's compared to, I remember Linda has the art market. She had asked me one time, well, how do you get this gold color, you know, or this antique look to it? And I said, well, it's like oil painting, really, but you're doing it with this watercolor, and you're not using the heavy pigment and everything. I've learned a lot. You have to be careful, because if you go back and you're putting sort of this antique look to it, sometimes they'll have pigments that'll change your whole color, so you have to kind of watch that. But I enjoy the color. Now, you know, Native American art by nature is more dark colors or heavy paint, which that's what they had, but that just almost, to me, gives them more of a reality, of life. So that's, I don't know, that's just one of those things that, especially with facial expressions and things like that, that, and I've had people say, well, I had a couple of fellows when we were at a show in Oklahoma City. They were both architect students, but they looked at it and they said, pen and ink? And I said, no, it's brush when I do a painting. And they said, what? And they looked a little closer, So, yeah, the eyes, that's another thing of it. I just enjoyed, again, that flow, and it's easier to do like that, I know Linda and this lady had brought in a couple of pieces that could be Charlie Russell's, and it was on wallboard, wallpaper and then wallboard underneath it. So we were looking at it, and Linda said, well, I don't know, there's, and it was watercolor, and then there was emphasis with ink in the ink, And I said, well, I don't know what that would be. And I said, just from my perspective, he's got the same flow. So for another individual to come in and pick it up and get still the same flow would be unusual, I think. But
that's where it's really valuable to have an artist in the gallery.
Yeah, well, but she's still, gonna have to do some other things. But I think it's his, So.
Right. Well, so the golden color you were talking about is like a background wash, and the paintings I've seen, the gouaches I've seen, have a lot of earth tones mainly, but then you might have a real bright, piece of green or blue or red in there as an accent. The grandparent-grandchild relationship is obviously important in your work. What special opportunities for humor or drama does that relationship have for you?
Well, being a grandmother now, and again, I've always enjoyed children. That's obviously, but the humor is there, and we learn from older people. And that's what I remember and relate to, is what I learned from my grandmother. I learned so many skills. We made our own clothes. I think back now, and I was telling my daughter the other day, I said, I didn't have a store-bought dress, for a long time. Even up into high school, I'd go home and make my outfit, and go down and pick out the material and go home and make my new skirt or whatever, because we didn't have clothing stores right there in the area. But I learned those things from her, quilting, all kinds of things, rag rugs, but at that time you didn't throw anything away, you used it all. But those relationships with that grandmother, that's the person usually that has more time to be able to have that teaching experience, and that goes back to that Indian culture as well. I'm not going to say it's the only one. I'm just saying that's usually what you saw in communities, where the older people were the teachers. So that's where the relationship is with that. So.
Well, and your whole kind of storyteller series that you did with grandmothers and grandchildren, that's one of the things that it always makes me think of, is how culture is transmitted, through the body, through a person and experience, and not through books. You've kind of talked about titles for your work, so I'm assuming that you sort of get the image in your mind before you know the title, or is that always the case?
Ideas, sometimes, and it's just it's amazing sometimes that you can have a really good idea and work and work and work and work, and it just doesn't develop. You know, it's just one of those things. And then one of my better ideas more recently, I sat down and it was within 4 minutes, had it sketched out, and it looked good, you know, and you just go, what?
Why this time?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that was my next question, you know, about your creative process. Does it go from idea to sketch, or how does that happen for you?
You know, I've been very blessed in that I could, when I get in that thinking and have that no pressures around that, I can just draw and draw and draw. The ideas are there. Oh gosh, I guess, one Sunday afternoon I did 8 sketches, you know, which is,
Wow.
that's pretty good.
Yes.
That's pretty good production, because when you get that worked out, then you can go to the painting, you know, so that's, but it's just being able to get that flow, and I'm sure that you've seen that with a lot of artists too, but.
So you do, I was wondering, you do preliminary sketches, and then you sketch again in pencil or with a brush and apply the
You know,
paint?
I didn't used to, I would do a sketch on the board and paint, and I can do that if I'm in a real big rush, you know, and everything, or if there's a lot of pressure. I don't like to do that, because if you want to change something, you better not have had it in dark pencil
Yes.
or anything, but that was one of the things I learned at school, which I say, go to school, even if it's for a semester, you will learn. But sketches helped you get that idea, and that idea can grow. It doesn't have to be just one character, too. I mean, if you get this going, then you can see how it's going to be laid out, the balance, everything, you know, so. And then, too, I came to realize that it's not bad to have those records, you know.
That's a good point.
I had the Creek Nation had called me about a young lady they wanted to send over and us look at her work, because she was wanting to go to school back in New York. She's in her 20s and has a little boy, but so I said, well, bring some of your portfolio or whatever you have, but she really didn't have, you know, she didn't know that structure, she didn't know, she had a few things, but we sat down and talked about it, and but I recommend she go out to Santa Fe, you know. I said, at least go out there for a semester.
To the
and see.
Institute of American
Exactly.
Indian Art.
Right. New York, you know, I won't even go into that. I'm not saying it's not for people, but it's scary to recommend.
It's a big transition.
It is.
What is your creative routine these days?
Well, you know, I can't help it. Sometimes I've got to do something, you know. And there again, I do some beadwork. I'm working on a belt right now for my, one of my granddaughters, Sky Wildcat. I've made Cherokee dresses over the years, you know, for the girls. And I need to make one now for my 3-year-old. And I love to make tear dresses, so that's, and it's time consuming. And I've had people tell me, you don't need to be doing that, you need to be painting and everything. But, you know, you need to get away from the painting sometimes and do some other things as well. So,
right.
But I enjoy different creative areas in the Native American work. So, but
looking back on your career, what do you think was a really important defining moment or event? And it might be something you've already mentioned.
Well, first off, I think that if I had not had encouragement, I probably wouldn't have gone on and pursued it. I mean, we would still have probably done arts and crafts and things like that, but I don't know that, and that's always important. And as I said before, I think we need to encourage our young people, and then you go from there, and if they really are excited about it, you know, they'll pursue it. But But it is, I tell young people too, that it's not easy. It's not going to be wake up one day and you're famous. That's just not the way it works. And you've got to pay your dues. You've got to get in there and work, and it's not always going to be, you're tested. There's no doubt about it. I can remember thinking, well, gosh, this is a great piece, and not get that recognition, but that was okay. And later down the line, someone would say, well, I haven't seen this before. Where this guy so you never know what's going to take place. But I really have enjoyed every bit of it, and I go back to the camaraderie of other artists. I know one time I said to Paulette Ainsley, I said, we need to really look down the line and think about a retirement center for artists. And she just died laughing. She said, an old folks home for artists. I said, well, be kind of lonesome if we don't get to see each other anymore. And the thing is, you don't get to see as many anymore.
Right.
So everybody's kind of scattered, and it's but that was, looking back, and of course you don't realize it at the time, but there was that really hot time, that was really heavy, and we saw each other every week almost, that was
right.
Just somewhere.
Right. That really creates strong bonds.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think has been one of the highlights of your career?
Well, I think for me personally, getting to know and meet some really wonderful artists, absolutely wonderful artists. I just go through it, and gosh, there was so many. Merlin, I knew Merlin way back, before you knew him, and he had such talent, and he does have talent, but it was just at that time he was kind of coming in,
right.
And gosh, I think back about that, getting to meet people like that, and then like Parker Boyle, and I could just go on and name, but some outstanding, Valjean Hessing and Jane, and it just goes on and on and on. That was the highlight of getting to really know these people personally, and just being in that experience. If I hadn't even painted, if I'd had that opportunity, I would have loved it. Quite an experience.
How about one of the low points?
Well, low points was always that struggle of money to get there,
Mm-hmm.
to get to the next show. And of course, it got better over the years, but I think back when we took off, my daughters, 3 daughters and I, to Oklahoma City to a show and had $20, and I think, all right, we're going to do okay, and it would work out, So you have to have a lot of faith, I don't know I recommend that for everybody, but we didn't have any bad experiences, which I think back how risky that was, but, and that's, you have to be nervous about it, you never know, but that was, yeah, you're young and stupid, I guess, and you don't have sense enough to worry about it.
Is there anything that we've forgotten or anything you'd like to discuss?
Well, I don't think so. I think one of the outstanding things for Native American art is the galleries that support, and they really invest a lot. I oftentimes wonder if they could break even at all, because they have a lot invested, and they've been very supportive and encouraging, and have helped Indian artists survive.
Yes, I think
because you're not getting a weekly paycheck. It's just so these art galleries have bought work to enable artists to be able to continue. And if if you don't have that, you can't stay in it. So, but we've just really had some outstanding folks that were supportive, not only in Oklahoma, but Arkansas and different places outside too. But Oklahoma's blessed with all this culture in the state too, so that's
Great. Well, let's take a look at some of your paintings. I understand we are looking at a pen and ink here. Would you like to tell us about this one?
Well, as I said before, this is where I like that flow, like back to the music again. And I think when the viewer views it, they may not be aware of that, but that gives them a good feeling. And it's, you know, the flow, the position, even with the shoulders and the drape and everything. And I just love to get that in there, that feeling, and that it's almost like when you're drawing it, you're conducting, you know. It's just one of those things that's the rhythm of it.
Right, and the nice little counterpoint with the little boy in the basket, really guiding your eye around. That's wonderful. Is this one that you did title or didn't title?
No, I didn't title this. This is, of course, any mother that's working on anything and a baby around, they're always included, you know. They're curious, they're in that. And I just like to add that in there because that is usually the case for a lot of women, you know, that they have a lot of responsibilities, but they have that creativity and enjoy beauty as well.
So here we've got two depictions of children in different situations.
Well, the one is the little boy around cows and horses and things like that, but he's emulating adult behavior and learning to rope. And so he's practicing on this gull on a stump there and watching as well as the uncle or whoever back there roping a cow, you know, so. And he's having some difficulty even roping the one that's just on the stump, you know, much less from a horse. So, but learning, you know, from them. And then this one is little girl, as I said, a lot of people love the children and like with the rag dolls. And over here, I've used the little dog. People have asked me about the dog, and we had a dog that Connie. We named her Connie. My kids loved her, and she was always there, right up on the bed. And I remember my mother-in-law came and spent the night, and she slept with two of the girls, and she said to one of the girls, because it was winter cold, and she said, well, what's down at the bottom of the bed? And she said, Connie. So Connie was down under the cover. But anyway, this is the children in mud cups. They've made little cups out of mud, and my children, they did a lot of those things. They still talk about that today, that most of their toys were made out of stuff from the yard and around, and they loved it. They didn't know the difference, but we created that, so.
Right, those are the best.
This is telephone operator, the old plug-in board, and we did have, well, of course, people were going to school a lot and everything, but we had a couple of Native American ladies that worked there in Haskell in that little telephone office. But I'd go down there and visit, you know, and everything, but it was that old party line thing way back there. And they knew everything in Haskell that was going on. They could hear, you know, on these phone calls and everything. I can say that now since it's gone, but again, here is that antique gold look to it that I do try to get into pieces that is a part of the history or back in time. I try to kind of give that antique feeling about it. And this one, the telephone company locally made prints of that to give to their retirees when they.
So the original was a commission.
Yes.
All right, would you like to tell us about this piece?
Yes, this is the title of it. It's that time again, and it's time for a haircut, which most kids don't like to do that, especially a homemade haircut, which was a bowl cut almost.
Sugar bowl.
Yeah, and so grandmother again is taking the responsibility of that, and of course his little sister is just loving it and laughing, you know, and he's not going to be happy about it no matter what. But that was again for the time, and if you're looking in the turn of the century, that was the way you did those things. You just took care of it like that. But again, with the grandparents and being the caregivers to children most of the time, you know, and I like the colors that came, you know, did well with the gouache this time on this, and
Right.
still that antique look, but you get the blue, the navy blue back in there, and it connects well with the red in his shirt too. So.
Right. It's a really nice piece. And this one was titled The Haircut, wasn't
Yes.
it? Yes.
And this was commissioned by the Organization for Mentally Handicapped in Wichita, Kansas. And they sold prints for their program. So they were the original people that started that for this one. Anyway, so.
What a wonderful benefit. Well, thank you so much, Joan, for your time.
Well, thank
today.
you. I appreciate it. And gosh, I'm honored, as I said. This is, I've enjoyed the years I could put in art. I always regret I didn't have enough time, you know, to put in, but I really enjoyed it. And thank you so much.
There's more time coming.
I hope so.